Miranda Reeves, sir.
Go 6. My God, it's really you.
Sir, I think there's some mistake.
Colonel, it's an honor to meet you.
They mocked her old jacket until a general recognized the patch and froze. When Miranda Reeves walked into the Fort Bragg commissary wearing her faded military jacket, the young officers couldn't stop laughing at the old lady playing dress-up. But when 4-star General Marcus Harris spotted the patch on her sleeve, his face went white, and he whispered, "Dear God, Ghost 6. The Fort Bragg commissary bustled with the typical Saturday morning crowd of military families stocking up on groceries for the week ahead. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across aisles filled with everything from cereal to cleaning supplies. The checkout lines moved steadily as cashiers scanned items, while children tugged at their parents' uniforms and spouses compared prices on their phones. Near the entrance, a small seating area provided a gathering spot where off-duty personnel often stopped to chat their conversations, mixing with the ambient noise of shopping carts and scanner beeps that created the soundtrack of military family life. Miranda Reeves, 58, moved through the commissary with the quiet efficiency of someone who preferred to remain unnoticed. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore civilian clothes except for one item that marked her as different from the other shoppers, a faded military jacket that had seen better decades. The jacket's original color was barely discernible beneath years of wear, and its patches were so weathered that most people couldn't make out what they represented. To casual observers, Miranda looked like any other military retiree doing her weekly shopping. She kept her head down, spoke only when necessary to store employees, and moved through her routine with the practiced invisibility of someone who had spent years avoiding attention. What the other shoppers didn't know was that Miranda carried secrets that had shaped military operations for over 2 decades, and that the worn patches on her jacket represented service in units so classified that their very existence was known only to a handful of people in the Pentagon. The jacket itself was more than clothing to Miranda. It was a connection to a past she couldn't discuss, and comrades she couldn't publicly honor, a tangible reminder of sacrifices that would never be officially acknowledged. As Miranda made her way through the produce section, she became aware of snickering from a group of young officers near the deli counter. Second Lieutenant Brad Morrison and First Lieutenant Sarah Chen were pointing in her direction, their conversation loud enough to be overheard by nearby shoppers. "Look at that old lady trying to look military," Morrison said with obvious amusement. "That jacket's probably older than we are." Miranda had faced this kind of mockery before. People who saw her age and gender and assumed she was either a military spouse playing dress-up or a veteran from some non-combat support role who was trying to appear more important than she actually was. Miranda paused at the dairy case, pretending to examine milk prices, while the young officers continued their commentary. She could walk away, as she usually did when faced with such situations, or she could confront them and risk the kind of attention she had spent years avoiding. "I bet she was a cook or something," Lieutenant Chen added to Morrison's mockery. "Probably thinks wearing that old jacket makes her look like a real soldier." The comment stung, not because they questioned Miranda's military credentials, but because they dismissed the sacrifices of the women and men she had served with in operations that these young officers couldn't imagine. Her unit had operated in the shadows, conducting missions that saved countless lives while receiving no public recognition or glory. Miranda made the decision she always made in these situations. She would endure the mockery in silence and complete her shopping as quickly as possible. Speaking up would only draw more attention, and attention was something she had been trained to avoid at all costs. But as she reached for a carton of milk, she noticed that their conversation had attracted the attention of other shoppers, including several military families whose children were now staring at her with curiosity and confusion. Miranda's plan was simple: finish her shopping and leave without engaging with the officers who were making her the subject of their entertainment. She had perfected this strategy over the years, understanding that confrontation would only escalate situations and potentially compromise the anonymity she had worked so hard to maintain. As she moved through the store, however, the young officers seemed to be following her, their comments growing louder and more pointed. Morrison had apparently decided that mocking an elderly woman in a military jacket was the highlight of his Saturday morning entertainment. "Hey, ma'am," Morrison called out as Miranda approached the checkout line. "Where'd you serve the mess hall at Fort Kitchen?" His joke drew laughter from Lieutenant Chen and several other young soldiers who had gathered to watch the spectacle. Miranda felt the familiar weight of isolation that came with carrying secrets no one could know, serving in ways no one could acknowledge, and sacrificing in silence while others received credit and recognition. She had two choices: respond to the provocation and risk exposing herself, or continue to endure the humiliation while protecting the classified nature of her service. For Miranda, the choice had always been clear. The mission came first, even years after retirement. Miranda reached the checkout line and began placing her items on the conveyor belt, hoping that the physical act of completing her transaction would signal an end to the unwanted attention. The cashier, a young woman who appeared to be a military spouse, gave Miranda a sympathetic look that suggested she had witnessed the entire exchange. "Thank you for your service," the cashier said quietly as she began scanning Miranda's items. The simple acknowledgement meant more to Miranda than the young woman could have known, but it also drew another round of snickers from Morrison and his growing audience. "Service!" Morrison said loudly. "What service serving coffee to real soldiers?" Miranda's hands tightened on her purse as she fought the urge to respond. She had faced enemy fire-led classified operations and made decisions that had saved lives and changed the course of military history. But she couldn't defend herself without violating oaths she had taken and security clearances that remained active even in retirement. The cashier's expression hardened as she heard Morrison's comment. "Sir, I think you should show some respect. This lady is obviously a veteran." "Veteran of what?" Morrison replied. "The typing pool." The situation escalated when Morrison, emboldened by the laughter of his peers, decided to approach Miranda directly. His swagger and obvious enjoyment of the attention he was receiving from other shoppers revealed a young officer who had never faced real adversity or learned the humility that came with genuine combat experience. "Ma'am, I'm curious," Morrison said, positioning himself where Miranda couldn't avoid him. "What unit were you in? I'm trying to figure out what those patches on your jacket represent, but they're so faded I can't make them out." Miranda looked up at the young lieutenant, seeing in his face the kind of arrogance that came from book learning without real-world experience. She could have ended his mockery with a few words about her actual service record, but doing so would violate security protocols that had governed her life for decades. "I served," Miranda said simply, her voice carrying a quiet authority that momentarily gave Morrison pause. "Served where?" Morrison pressed, apparently not recognizing the warning in Miranda's tone. "Served how?" "Because that jacket looks like something you picked up at a surplus store." The accusation that she was wearing a military jacket she hadn't earned was the deepest insult Morrison could have delivered, striking at the heart of military honor and integrity. The confrontation had drawn a crowd of shoppers, including several senior enlisted personnel who were beginning to look uncomfortable with Morrison's behavior. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a veteran of 3 deployments to Afghanistan, stepped closer to observe the exchange with obvious disapproval. "Lieutenant," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned her rank through experience rather than education, "maybe you should back off." But Morrison was too caught up in his performance to recognize the warning. "Sergeant, I'm just trying to understand what this lady's story is. She's wearing military insignia, but she won't say where she served." Lieutenant Chen, who had been enjoying the show, began to look uncertain as she noticed the expressions on the faces of the more senior personnel who were watching. Something about Miranda's bearing and the way she carried herself suggested that Morrison might be making a serious mistake. "Brad," Chen said quietly, "maybe we should just go." But Morrison was committed to his course of action. "No, I think people have a right to know if someone is misrepresenting their military service. Stolen valor is a serious issue." The accusation of stolen valor sent a ripple of tension through the gathered crowd as everyone understood the gravity of such a charge. The atmosphere in the commissary changed dramatically when the automatic doors opened and General Marcus Harris entered with his aide-de-camp. The 4-star general was making an informal visit to the base, and his presence immediately commanded attention from everyone in the store. General Harris, 62, was a legend in special operations circles, having commanded some of the military's most sensitive missions over a career spanning 4 decades. His reputation for integrity and his encyclopedic knowledge of military personnel made him one of the most respected officers in the Army. As he moved through the store, acknowledging the salutes and greetings of personnel, his eyes fell on the commotion near the checkout lines. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. A woman in a faded military jacket being confronted by a young lieutenant who was clearly out of his depth. But it wasn't the confrontation that froze General Harris in place. It was the patch on Miranda's jacket that he could see clearly from his position. The patch was so faded that most people couldn't make out its details, but General Harris recognized it immediately because he had authorized the unit it represented and had personally briefed its members on missions that remained classified to this day. General Harris approached the group with the measured stride of someone who was about to deliver a lesson that would be remembered for years. His aide, Captain Jennifer Walsh, followed closely behind, sensing that something significant was about to occur. "What seems to be the problem here?" General Harris asked, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came with 4 stars and decades of command experience. Morrison immediately snapped to attention, recognizing the general's rank, and suddenly realizing that his entertainment had attracted the attention of one of the most senior officers on the base. "Sir, I was just questioning this woman about her military service." Morrison said, his earlier confidence evaporating as he faced a general who could end his career with a single phone call. General Harris looked at Miranda, taking in her appearance and the patches on her jacket with the trained eye of someone who understood their significance. When his gaze fell on the specific patch that had caught his attention, his expression changed from curiosity to something approaching awe. "Ma'am," General Harris said, his voice suddenly formal and respectful, "may I ask your name?" Miranda looked up at the general, recognizing him from briefings she had attended years earlier. "Miranda Reeves, sir." The moment General Harris heard Miranda's name, his entire demeanor shifted from professional curiosity to something approaching reverence. The general's face went pale as he processed the implications of finding the legendary Ghost 6 shopping for groceries in a commissary while being mocked by junior officers who had no idea who they were talking to. "Ghost 6, General Harris whispered, using the call sign that had been known only to the highest levels of military command. "Dear God, it's really you." The use of the classified call sign sent shock waves through the gathered crowd. Even the junior officers who had been enjoying Morrison's performance began to realize that something far beyond their understanding was unfolding before them. Miranda's eyes widened as she heard her old call sign spoken aloud for the first time in over a decade. The general's recognition meant that her cover of anonymity was about to be shattered, and that the secret she had protected for so long might finally be exposed. "Sir," Miranda said quietly, "I think there's been some confusion." But General Harris wasn't confused. He had studied the classified files of Operation Nightfall, the mission that had made Miranda Reeves a legend in special operations circles. He knew about the impossible choices she had made, the lives she had saved, and the sacrifices that had earned her a place in the most classified halls of military honor. "Lieutenant Morrison," General Harris said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, "do you have any idea who you've been harassing?" Morrison's face showed complete confusion as he tried to process what was happening. The general's obvious respect for the woman he had been mocking suggested that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment, but he couldn't understand what he had missed. "Sir, I was just questioning her about her military service," Morrison stammered. "She wouldn't tell me where she served." General Harris turned to address the entire crowd that had gathered around them. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are in the presence of one of the most decorated soldiers in the history of the United States Army. Colonel Miranda Reeves, retired recipient of the Distinguished Service, Cross the Silver Star, and decorations that remain classified to this day." The revelation that Miranda held the rank of colonel sent another wave of shock through the crowd. Her faded jacket and quiet demeanor had given no indication of her actual rank or the significance of her service. Colonel Reeves led Operation Nightfall in 2003. General Harris continued a mission that saved the lives of over 200 American personnel and prevented a terrorist attack that could have killed thousands of civilians. Her unit operated behind enemy lines for 6 months, gathering intelligence and conducting operations that remain classified. Miranda felt the weight of decades of secrecy lifting from her shoulders as General Harris spoke. For the first time since her retirement, someone was publicly acknowledging the service that had defined her life and the sacrifices that had cost her everything she held dear. The patch on her jacket, General Harris explained, represents the 1st Special Operations Detachment, a unit so classified that its existence has never been officially acknowledged. Colonel Reeves was its commanding officer. The turning point came when General Harris did something that stunned everyone present. He came to attention and rendered a crisp military salute to Miranda, holding it until she returned the gesture with the automatic precision of someone whose military bearing had never truly left her. "Colonel, it is an honor to finally meet you in person," General Harris said as he completed his salute. "Your service to this country has been an inspiration to officers like myself for over 2 decades. Morrison's face had gone white as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had been mocking a colonel who had served in operations that were beyond his security clearance to even know about, let alone understand. "Sir," Morrison said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't know. I'm sorry." But General Harris wasn't finished. "Lieutenant, your behavior today has been a disgrace to the uniform you wear and an insult to every veteran who has served this country with honor. You will report to my office Monday morning to explain why you thought it was appropriate to mock a senior officer and decorated veteran." The public dressing down of Morrison served as a powerful reminder to everyone present about the importance of respect and the dangers of making assumptions about people based on their appearance. As the crowd in the commissary began to disperse, General Harris asked Miranda if she would be willing to speak with him privately about her experiences and the current state of Special Operations training. The request represented an opportunity for Miranda to step out of the shadows and contribute to the military community in ways she had never been able to do during her classified service. "Colonel, we have a new generation of officers who need to understand what real leadership looks like," General Harris explained. "Your experiences could provide invaluable lessons for the next generation of Special Operations personnel." Miranda found herself facing a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could return to her quiet anonymity, continuing to carry her secrets in silence, or she could accept the General's invitation to share her knowledge and help train the officers who would face the challenges of modern warfare. The decision was complicated by decades of conditioning that had taught her to avoid attention and protect classified information at all costs. But General Harris's public recognition had already shattered her anonymity, and she realized that her silence might no longer serve any useful purpose. Despite the validation she had received from General Harris, Miranda struggled with doubts about whether she was ready to step into a public role after decades of operating in the shadows. The skills that had made her an effective Special Operations officer, the ability to blend in to avoid attention to operate without recognition, were the opposite of what would be required if she accepted the General's invitation. "Sir, I'm not sure I'm the right person for this," Miranda said. "I've spent so many years staying invisible that I don't know if I can be effective in a teaching role." General Harris understood her reluctance. "Colonel, the very qualities that made you effective in classified operations, your humility, your focus on mission over personal recognition, your understanding of sacrifice, are exactly what our young officers need to learn." The conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Chen, who approached with obvious nervousness to offer her own apology for her part in Morrison's behavior. The climactic moment came when Miranda made the decision that would transform her from a forgotten veteran into a teacher and mentor for the next generation of military leaders. Standing in the commissary where she had been mocked just hours earlier, Surrounded by officers who now understood her true significance, Miranda accepted General Harris's invitation to share her experiences. "General, I'll do whatever I can to help," Miranda said, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had once commanded respect in the most dangerous situations imaginable. The decision represented more than just agreeing to a teaching position. It was Miranda's choice to reclaim her identity as a soldier and leader after years of hiding in plain sight. The woman who had once been known only by a classified call sign was ready to step into the light and share the lessons learned through decades of service and sacrifice. The transition from anonymous retiree to recognized veteran presented immediate challenges for Miranda. Within days of the commissary incident, word of her identity had spread throughout the military community, bringing attention that she had spent years avoiding. Reporters began calling, seeking interviews about her classified service that she still couldn't discuss in detail. Fellow veterans reached out to share their own stories and express their gratitude for her service. Most challenging of all, she found herself recognized everywhere she went on base, forcing her to adapt to a level of visibility that felt foreign after decades of anonymity. "I don't know how to be famous," Miranda confided to General Harris during one of their planning meetings. "I've spent my entire career being invisible." The adjustment was particularly difficult because Miranda's instincts still told her to avoid attention and protect operational security, even though her service was now a matter of public record. The crucial test of Miranda's new role came when she was asked to address a group of young officers at the Special Operations Command, including Lieutenant Morrison, who had requested permission to attend her presentation as part of his remedial training. Standing before an audience of the military's elite, Miranda faced the challenge of sharing lessons from classified operations without compromising ongoing security requirements. Her presentation would need to balance the need for operational security with the educational value of her experiences. "Ladies and gentlemen," Miranda began, her voice steady. "Despite the magnitude of the moment, I want to talk to you about leadership in the shadows, about making decisions when no one will ever know what you've done, and about the responsibility that comes with serving in operations that don't officially exist." Her words carried the weight of experience that couldn't be taught in classrooms or learned from textbooks. As she spoke about the moral complexities of special operations, the importance of team cohesion, and the personal cost of classified service, the audience listened with the rapt attention of students learning from a master. Morrison, sitting in the front row, took notes with the intensity of someone who had learned a hard lesson about respect and humility. The presentation concluded with a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. But the real victory came in the conversations that followed. Young officers approached Miranda with questions about leadership ethics and the challenges of serving in classified roles, seeking guidance that only someone with her experience could provide. "Colonel," one young captain said, "how do you maintain your sense of purpose when no one can know what you've accomplished?" Miranda's answer reflected the wisdom gained through decades of silent service. "You remember that the mission is bigger than any individual recognition. The lives you save, the threats you neutralize, the intelligence you gather, these things matter whether anyone knows about them or not." The moment represented Miranda's transformation from a forgotten veteran into a teacher and mentor, whose influence would shape the next generation of special operations leaders. Her decision to step out of the shadows had given her a new mission that was just as important as any she had undertaken during her classified service. Miranda's emergence from anonymity had immediate and far-reaching effects throughout the military community. Her story became a powerful reminder about the importance of respecting veterans regardless of their appearance or apparent status, leading to changes in how military personnel were trained to interact with retirees and civilians on base. Lieutenant Morrison's public humiliation became a cautionary tale used in leadership training programs, illustrating the dangers of making assumptions and the importance of treating everyone with respect. His remedial training included extensive study of military history and the contributions of veterans who had served in classified roles. The commissary incident was documented and used as a case study in military ethics courses, demonstrating how quickly situations could escalate and how important it was for officers to maintain professional behavior at all times. Miranda's willingness to share her experiences within the bounds of security requirements provided valuable insights for special operations training programs and helped bridge the gap between classified operations and the broader military community. 5 years after the commissary incident, Miranda had become one of the military's most respected instructors and mentors, working with special operations units to develop training programs that emphasized ethical leadership and decision-making under pressure. Her unique perspective as someone who had operated in the shadows for decades provided invaluable insights for the next generation of classified operators. The Miranda Reeves Leadership Institute was established at Fort Bragg, focusing on training officers for the moral and ethical challenges of special operations. The Institute's curriculum emphasized the importance of humility, respect for all service members, and the understanding that true leadership often occurred without recognition or glory. Morrison, who had learned from his mistake and dedicated himself to becoming a better officer, eventually became one of Miranda's most effective students and advocates. His transformation from an arrogant lieutenant to a respected leader served as proof that even the most serious errors in judgment could be overcome through dedication and humility. On the anniversary of the commissary incident, Miranda returned to the same store where her life had changed so dramatically. As she walked through the aisles, she was greeted with respectful nods and quiet words of thanks from military personnel who recognized her not as the anonymous woman in the faded jacket, but as Colonel Miranda Reeves, a leader whose service had finally received the recognition it deserved. Standing at the checkout line where she had once been mocked, Miranda reflected on how a moment of public humiliation had become the catalyst for a new chapter of service and purpose. True honor isn't found in the brightness of your uniform or the visibility of your service, but in the quiet courage to do what's right when no one is watching, and the wisdom to teach others when the shadows finally lift.